You can eat 100 grams of protein a day, track every single gram, feel disciplined about it, and still be silently feeding the belly fat you are trying to get rid of. Not because protein is the wrong food, not because you are eating too little of it, because of how those grams are spread across your day, and after 50, the spread decides almost everything about where that protein ends up. Here is the number that explains it. Your muscle does not respond to protein the way a bank account responds to deposits. It responds to a threshold. Roughly 30 grams of high-quality protein in a single sitting, carrying about 2.5 to 3 grams of one specific amino acid called leucine. Below that line, the muscle-building signal does not fire at all. Not weakly, not partially. It does not fire, and the protein you ate does not sit patiently in your bloodstream, waiting for the rest of the day's grams to show up. It gets picked up within a couple of hours by an organ that has a completely different plan for it. Now hold that number against how Americans actually eat. National survey data on adult intake shows the typical breakfast in this country carries somewhere around 10 to 14 grams of protein. Lunch lands near 20. Dinner carries 60, sometimes more. The daily total looks perfect on paper. The distribution means you spent about 2/3 of your waking day underneath the threshold, and then dumped most of your protein into a single meal at 8 at night, at the exact hour when your muscle is least responsive to it, and your fat cells are most willing to accept whatever is left over. I'm going to walk you through one ordinary day, hour by hour, and show you exactly what your body does with every gram of protein at every stage, including the hours you have never thought about. At the end, I will hand you the TAP protocol. 3 adjustments, each with an exact number in grams and in minutes, that change where your protein goes without changing how much of it you eat. You will not buy anything. You will not eat more. You will move the same food to different hours and hit one threshold that almost nobody in the mainstream nutrition conversation ever puts a number on. I read the studies. I am going to show you what they actually measured, not the version that survived the trip through a magazine headline. The invisible villain in this video has a name, and it is not a food. It is a protein complex sitting inside your muscle cells called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. Think of it as the warehouse manager who decides whether the building runs a construction shift or an idle shift. He does not count calories. He does not read your food log. He watches the loading dock for one specific delivery, and the delivery he is watching for is leucine. When enough leucine arrives at once, he signs for it, calls in the crew, and muscle protein synthesis begins. When the delivery shows up under the minimum size, he refuses the shipment. He does not sign a partial slip. There is no half shift. That is the part almost nobody in the mainstream explains, and the consequence is where your belly fat comes in. When the delivery gets refused, those amino acids do not evaporate. They travel to your liver, which strips the nitrogen off them, ships that nitrogen out as urea through your kidneys, and keeps the carbon skeleton that is left behind. That carbon skeleton has 2 possible fates. It becomes glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, or it becomes the raw material for fat. Either way, glucose enters your blood. Insulin rises to handle it, and insulin, as long as it is elevated, physically locks the enzyme inside your fat tissue called hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme whose entire job is releasing stored fat so you can burn it. Read that sequence again slowly, because it is the whole video in 4 sentences. You ate protein. The protein missed the threshold. The liver converted part of it into sugar. The sugar raised insulin. The insulin locked your fat cells. You ate the food you were told burns fat, and the way you spaced it turned it into a mild fat storage signal instead. This is not motivation. This is biology, and it runs whether you know about it or not. The threshold itself is not fixed across a lifetime, and this is where people over 50 get hit twice. In a healthy 25-year-old, roughly 20 grams of quality protein, about 1.7 grams of leucine, is enough to trigger a full muscle-building response. Work from Blake Rasmussen and Douglas Padden-Jones at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, published in the Journal of Nutrition and in the American Journal of Physiology, documented that the same 20 grams produces a blunted response in older adults. The receiver got less sensitive. Donald Lehman at the University of Illinois spent years mapping the leucine side of this and landed on the same practical conclusion. Older muscle needs a bigger single delivery to sign for the same shipment. Researchers call this anabolic resistance, and it is one of the most consistent findings in aging muscle physiology. So the person over 50 is not making one mistake. They are making two at the same time. Their threshold has quietly climbed from about 20 grams toward 30 or more, and their eating pattern was built decades ago around a breakfast that never carried more than 12. The gap between what their muscle now requires and what their morning actually delivers widens every year without a single visible signal that it is happening. No symptom. No number on the scale. Just a slow drift where the same food stops doing what it used to do. And muscle loss is not a cosmetic issue here. Adults lose somewhere between 3 and 8% of muscle mass per decade after 30, and the rate accelerates after 60. Skeletal muscle is the largest place your body puts glucose after a meal. Research from Ralph DeFronzo, whose work on insulin resistance at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio shaped how the entire field understands this, established that muscle clears the majority of the glucose you absorb after eating. When muscle shrinks, that storage capacity shrinks with it. The glucose has to go somewhere else. It goes to your liver and to your fat tissue, and in adults past midlife, it goes preferentially to the fat stored inside your abdominal cavity, around your organs. Visceral fat, the kind that makes a waistline expand while a bathroom scale barely moves. Now let me start the clock, because the hour-by-hour picture is where this stops being theory. Hour 0, your alarm goes off at 6:30 in the morning. You have not eaten since dinner, maybe 10 or 11 hours ago. Overnight, your body has been running a slow, steady breakdown of muscle tissue to supply amino acids for everything that has to keep operating while you sleep. Immune cells, gut lining repair, enzyme production, the constant turnover that never stops. This is normal. It is supposed to be reversed in the morning by a delivery large enough to flip the warehouse from breakdown to construction. Overnight, you were in a small deficit. Nothing is wrong yet. Everything depends on the next 2 hours. Hour 1, 7:30 in the morning. You eat what most Americans over 50 eat, and I want to be specific because the specificity is the point. A cup of coffee, 2 slices of whole grain toast with butter, maybe some jam, a banana, or the health-conscious version, a bowl of oatmeal with berries and a spoon of honey. Total protein, somewhere between 6 and 9 grams. Total leucine, under 1 gram. The warehouse manager looks at the delivery, sees roughly 1/3 of the minimum, and refuses it. Not one muscle fiber receives a construction order from that meal. Meanwhile, the carbohydrate portion of that breakfast, the toast, the oats, the banana, the jam, all of it converts to glucose within 30 to 60 minutes, and insulin climbs to handle it. Hour 2, 8:30 in the morning. Insulin is now elevated and will stay meaningfully elevated for the next 2 to 3 hours. Your fat cells are locked. Hormone-sensitive lipase is shut off. That small amount of protein you did eat has already been routed to the liver, deaminated, and partly converted into more glucose. Your muscle is still in the same net breakdown state it was in when your alarm went off. You have eaten. You are not fasting. And your body has still not received a single instruction to build anything. It received an instruction to store. Hour 3, 9:30 in the morning. Here is where the pattern starts feeling like something instead of being invisible. Blood glucose is coming down off its peak, and, in most people past 50, with any degree of insulin resistance, it overshoots slightly on the way down. You feel it as a flatness around the middle of the morning, slightly foggy, slightly hungry, even though you ate 90 minutes ago, and you know you should not be hungry yet. That sensation is not weak willpower. It is a glucose curve doing exactly what a breakfast with almost no protein in it will always make it do. And it is the reason mid-morning snacking exists as an entire product category in this country. Hour 4 is where the second and much larger mistake begins, and it is the one that turns a bad morning into a full day of missed thresholds. Because what you do at 10:30 in the morning determines whether lunch has any chance of hitting the number. And almost everyone gets it exactly backwards. Hour 4. 10:30 in the morning. The flatness has arrived, and you handle it the way a careful person handles it. A granola bar, a small handful of almonds, a second coffee with a splash of cream. Every one of those choices is defensible on its own, and every one of them carries between 3 and 6 grams of protein. The warehouse manager looks at the loading dock for the second time this morning and refuses the delivery again. But something else has now happened that matters more. Insulin, which had finally started falling after breakfast, gets a fresh signal and climbs. Hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme that releases stored fat, had been unlocked for maybe 20 minutes. It locks back down. You are 4 hours into your day, 2 feeding events in, with 0 muscle-building signals delivered, and your fat cells in storage mode for almost the entire stretch. Hour 6, 12:30 in the afternoon, lunch. And this is the meal where people over 50 who are actively trying to do the right thing lose the most ground, because the meal looks correct from every angle. A large salad, grilled chicken on top, the portion a restaurant or a home kitchen typically serves, about 3 ounces. Olive oil, vegetables, maybe some quinoa. Protein content, roughly 18 to 22 grams. Leucine content, somewhere near 1.6 to 1.8 grams. In a 25-year-old, that meal fires the muscle-building response. It clears the bar. In an adult over 50 carrying anabolic resistance, that same plate sits just under the line, and the manager refuses it again. This is the cruelest part of the whole mechanism, and it explains why so many people describe the same experience. They say the food that used to work stopped working. They did not change anything. Their receiver changed. The delivery that used to be signed for is now turned away at the same door. So those amino acids take the route we mapped earlier. Liver, nitrogen stripped and sent out, carbon skeleton converted into glucose. Insulin rises to manage the glucose from the quinoa and from the protein you thought was going to your arms and legs. Somewhere between 1:30 and 3 in the afternoon, your body has processed a healthy lunch into a mild fat storage instruction, and you have consumed roughly 35 grams of protein across 3 feeding events without triggering a single construction shift. Hour 8 and hour 9, 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. Your muscle tissue has now been in net breakdown for approximately 20 hours straight, since dinner last night. Not because you did anything abnormal, but because breakdown is the default state and building is the exception that requires a specific trigger you have not delivered. Every hour in that state, small amounts of amino acids are being pulled out of your skeletal muscle to supply the rest of the body. On any single day, this is invisible. It is a rounding error. Across 365 days, it is the mechanism behind the number I gave you earlier, 3 to 8% of muscle mass lost per decade, accelerating after 60, and your waistline is the mirror image of that loss. Less muscle means less capacity to store the glucose from every meal. Michael Jensen and colleagues at the Mayo Clinic have spent decades measuring how fat behaves in different body compartments. And the finding that matters here is that the fat inside your abdominal cavity is not passive storage. It sits on the portal vein, which drains directly into your liver, and it releases free fatty acids and inflammatory signals straight into that circulation all day long. So the abdominal fat you gain from this pattern is not just the visible consequence. It becomes an active input that makes your liver more insulin resistant, which makes the next meal produce a larger insulin response, which locks your fat cells for longer, which makes the following day worse than the one before it. The loop tightens on itself. Hour 12, 6:30 in the evening. And here is where every gram of protein you did not eat earlier arrives at once. Dinner in American households carries the majority of the day's protein. A large piece of salmon or a steak or a chicken breast at 6 to 8 ounces, 60 to 65 grams. The manager finally sees a delivery well above the minimum. He signs for it. The crew comes in. Muscle protein synthesis begins for the first time in 22 hours. But there is a ceiling, and this is where the mainstream conversation about protein totals falls apart completely. Muscle protein synthesis does not scale up indefinitely with the size of the meal. Philip Atherton and colleagues at the University of Nottingham documented what researchers now call the muscle full effect. Once the building response is triggered and running, it saturates. Past a certain point, roughly 35 to 40 grams for most adults, additional protein in that same meal does not produce additional muscle. The response also becomes refractory. It runs for about 2 to 3 hours and then shuts down on its own, even if amino acids are still circulating. So of those 65 grams at dinner, somewhere around half did what you wanted. The rest went to the liver, got deaminated, and became glucose and fat precursors at 8 o'clock at night, which happens to be the single worst hour of the 24 for that to happen. Work from Frank Shear's group at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital on circadian metabolism has documented that insulin sensitivity follows a daily rhythm, running highest in the morning and lowest in the evening. The identical meal produces a larger and longer glucose and insulin response at 8 at night than it does at 8 in the morning. You front-loaded your carbohydrates into the hours when your muscle could not use them, and back-loaded your protein into the hours when your body handles the overflow worst. Hour 15. 9:30 at night. The construction shift ends. Insulin from dinner is still elevated and will remain elevated for another 2 to 3 hours. Longer if there was wine or dessert. Fat release stays locked through the entire evening. Around 11 or midnight, insulin finally falls. Hormone-sensitive lipase unlocks, and your body gets a few hours of genuine fat mobilization while you sleep, right before the overnight breakdown state begins again, and your alarm goes off at 6:30 to restart the identical loop. That is the full 24 hours, 100 grams of protein consumed, 1 building signal delivered, 22 hours in breakdown, roughly 11 hours with fat release locked by insulin. And on paper, you hit your target. Now here is the part that should make you angry, and I want to be precise about where the anger belongs, because it does not belong on you. The number that governs official protein advice in this country is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That is the recommended dietary allowance. It appears in the dietary guidelines, in hospital handouts, in the nutrition panel on the back of the box. What almost nobody explains is what that number was built to do. It came out of nitrogen balance studies and was set as the amount needed to prevent deficiency in 97% of healthy adults. Prevent deficiency, not preserve muscle. Not account for a 60-year-old whose muscle receiver has gotten less sensitive. It is a flaw designed to keep people from getting sick, and it has been read for 40 years as a target for staying well. The method itself has been challenged directly. Rajavel Elango and Paul Penchars at the University of Toronto used a different technique, indicator amino acid oxidation, and produced requirement estimates substantially higher than the classic nitrogen balance figures, in the range of 1.2 grams per kilogram or above for older adults. Stuart Phillips at McMaster University has published extensively arguing the same case for aging muscle. This is not a fringe position at the edge of the field. It has been in the peer-reviewed literature for well over a decade, and even that debate misses the deeper problem, because every side of it argues about the daily total. The daily total is not what your muscle reads. Your muscle reads each individual meal against a threshold. You can hit any daily number you want and deliver 0 building signals, which is precisely what the day I just described does. Douglas Padden-Jones and Blake Rasmussen at the University of Texas Medical Branch published the per-meal distribution work in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association back in 2009. Roughly 30 grams per meal, 3 times a day. That paper is old enough to have a teenager. It has not reached the average person over 50 who is doing everything they were told to do. Why not? Follow the incentive. A food company can put a protein claim on a package with 6 grams in it and sell it as a protein product, because there is no regulation requiring the package to tell you whether 6 grams does anything at all. A fitness influencer builds content around daily totals because totals are simple, shareable, and sell supplements. A physician managing a 12-minute appointment with a patient on 3 medications is not going to spend 4 of those minutes on per meal leucine distribution and was likely never taught it, because nutrition instruction in American medical training has been documented for years as running well under what most schools consider adequate. Nobody in this chain lied to you. Every link had a reason to pass along the simple version. The simple version is what cost you 22 hours of breakdown a day. I want to tell you how I found this briefly because it explains why I know the pattern so well. 3 years ago, my body weight had not moved in 18 months. Same number on the scale, within 2 pounds, month after month. I considered that a success. Then I got a body composition scan, the kind that separates lean tissue from fat tissue instead of adding them together, and the results were not what the scale had been telling me. I had lost close to 5 pounds of lean mass and gained almost exactly the same amount of fat, most of it around the middle. Identical weight, completely different body. My protein intake during that entire period was, by my own log, above 100 grams a day. Every gram of it eaten in the pattern I just walked you through. I was not under-eating protein. I was mistiming all of it, and the scale was designed in a way that could never show me that. What changed things was not eating more. It was moving the same food to different hours and hitting one number at the right moments, which is exactly what I am going to give you next. The protein trick is not a food, not a supplement, and not an increase in how much you eat. It is a threshold hit at the right hours, and the whole thing fits into 3 moves. I call it the TAP protocol, and each of the 3 has an exact number attached to it, because a protocol without numbers is a slogan. The letter T stands for threshold, 35 grams of protein per meal, carrying at least 3 grams of leucine at 3 separate meals. That is the number for adults over 50, and it sits deliberately above the 30-gram figure you see in the research on younger populations, because of the anabolic resistance we mapped earlier. Your receiver got less sensitive, so the delivery has to be bigger to get signed for. The leucine number is the one that actually matters, and here is how to estimate it without a laboratory. Animal protein sources run about 8% leucine by protein weight. Whey runs closer to 10 or 11%. Plant sources run around 6 to 7%. So 35 grams of protein from chicken, fish, beef, eggs, or dairy gives you approximately 2.8 grams of leucine, which clears the bar. 35 grams from lentils and beans gives you roughly 2.3, which does not, and that is why people over 50 eating mostly plant protein need to run their per meal number closer to 45 or 50 grams to produce the same signal. Real amounts, so nothing is left vague. 5 ounces of cooked chicken breast is about 40 grams. 6 ounces of salmon is about 36. 4 large eggs is only 24 grams, which is the single most common near miss in this entire pattern. So 4 eggs plus a half cup of cottage cheese gets you to 38. 1 cup of plain Greek yogurt runs about 20 to 23 grams, meaning yogurt alone almost never clears the threshold and needs a scoop of whey or a half cup of cottage cheese stirred in. A standard whey scoop is 25 grams of protein carrying close to 3 grams of leucine, which is why whey is the most efficient repair tool for a meal that would otherwise land short. The letter A stands for anchor. Your first threshold meal happens within 90 minutes of waking. Not within 4 hours, not whenever you get hungry. 90 minutes. This is the move that recovers the largest block of time in the entire day, and here is the mechanism. You wake up after 10 or 11 hours in net muscle breakdown. Every hour you stay there past waking is an hour added to that ledger. When you hit 35 grams with 3 grams of leucine in the morning, you flip the warehouse from breakdown to construction at hour 1 instead of hour 12. In the day we walked through, that single change converts 22 hours of breakdown into roughly 6. Nothing else about your diet changed. You moved chicken or eggs or whey from 8 at night to 7 in the morning. There is a second reason the morning anchor pays more than the same meal eaten later, and almost nobody in the mainstream nutrition conversation connects these two things. Insulin sensitivity follows a daily rhythm that runs highest in the early hours, documented in the circadian metabolism work out of Frank Shear's group at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. Protein eaten in the morning is handled by a body that is at its most efficient at that hour. The same protein at 9 at night is handled by a body running its worst insulin response of the day. You are moving the same food from your metabolic low point to your metabolic high point. If you are fasting, this does not mean you have to stop. It means your first meal after the fast, whenever your window opens, has to clear 35 grams before anything else goes on the plate. And it means recognizing that the hours you spend fasted are hours in breakdown, not hours in building. That is a real trade, not a free lunch, and anyone selling it to you as free is not being straight with you. The letter P stands for pace. 4 hours minimum between threshold meals, and no more than 40 grams in any one of them. 2 numbers, 1 purpose, and the mechanism here is the piece that separates people who understand this from people repeating it. Muscle protein synthesis is refractory. When the warehouse manager signs for a delivery, the crew works for about 2 to 3 hours and then clocks out, whether or not amino acids are still circulating in your blood. Philip Atherton and colleagues at the University of Nottingham documented this saturation directly. The system will not respond again until amino acid levels and insulin have come back down and reset. Donald Lehman at the University of Illinois has made the same point about the necessity of the trough between meals. The valley is not wasted time. The valley is what makes the next peak possible, which is why grazing destroys this. If you eat 35 grams at 7 in the morning and then have a protein bar at 9:30, the second one does not build anything. It cannot. The system is still in its refractory window. What that bar does do is keep insulin elevated, which keeps hormone-sensitive lipase locked, which keeps your fat cells in storage mode through hours that should have been spent releasing fat. You paid calories for a signal that was never received. 4 hours of clear space between meals lets amino acid levels fall, lets insulin fall, lets fat release run, and lets the manager become willing to sign again. The 40-gram ceiling exists because past that point the muscle response saturates. 65 grams at dinner does not build more than 40. The surplus goes to your liver, gets converted, and lands in the exact abdominal fat you are trying to reduce. So the practical shape of a tap day is 35 to 40 grams at breakfast around 7, 35 to 40 at lunch around noon or 1, and 35 to 40 at dinner no later than 7 in the evening. Roughly 110 to 120 grams total. If you were already eating 100 grams a day, you are adding almost nothing. You are relocating what you already eat from 1 meal into 3 and turning 1 building signal into 3. Now the mistake, and this is the one that quietly invalidates the entire protocol for most people who try it, they add the morning protein and never subtract from dinner. They keep the 6-ounce steak at 8 at night, add a 40-gram breakfast on top, and now they are eating 140 or 150 grams of protein and several hundred more calories than they were a week ago. Within a month, the waistline has not improved, and they conclude the protocol does not work. The protocol never ran. What ran was the old pattern, with a new meal stapled to the front of it. Redistribution means the dinner portion comes down as the breakfast portion goes up. Same total, different hours. The second version of the same error is subtler and more common among people who are genuinely careful. They hit 35 grams at breakfast, hit 35 at lunch, and then keep a handful of almonds at 10:30 and a Greek yogurt at 3:30 because those are healthy foods. Every one of those small feedings lands inside a refractory window where it cannot build anything. And every one of them raises insulin during the hours your fat cells were supposed to be unlocked. 3 threshold meals with clean 4-hour valleys between them will outperform 5,000 well-intentioned protein snacks scattered across the same day. And the difference has nothing to do with willpower or how clean the food is. It is a signaling system with a reset requirement, and grazing never lets it reset. One more layer worth knowing, especially past 50. Resistance training makes the muscle receiver more sensitive for roughly 24 to 48 hours afterward. Stuart Phillips at McMaster University has published extensively on this interaction. What it means practically is that on the days you do any loaded work, Even 2 sets of bodyweight squats and a set of push-ups, your 35 grams produces a larger response than it does on a completely sedentary day. You are not training to burn calories in this context. You are training to lower the threshold so the food you were already going to eat does more. So here is the whole thing in one breath. 35 grams of protein with 3 grams of leucine 3 times a day. First meal within 90 minutes of waking. 4 hours of clear space between meals, 40 grams ceiling on any single one. Same food, different hours, one threshold hit 3 times instead of once. That is the trick. It never required a supplement, and the reason nobody told you until now is that the daily total was easier to print on a label than the per meal number was to explain. None of this is motivation, it is biology, and it runs on the same schedule whether you decide to use it or not. If you are going to run the TAP protocol this week, comment the word TAP below so I can see who is actually moving on this instead of just watching it. I read the comments, and in the next video I am going to take this one layer deeper into the thing that can shut down your 35-gram morning meal before the signal even reaches your muscle, which is what a short night of sleep does to the leucine threshold the following day. The number in that research surprised me, and it explains why the same breakfast works on Tuesday and does nothing on Thursday. Please subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps this content reach the people who need the mechanisms instead of the motivation. And it is the only reason I can keep publishing one video a week, every week.